I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding fiscal year 2022 first quarter proposed budget revisions and tax levies. It is Friday, April 15, 2022, and we are noticed from 1 to 3 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll on the phone, please, and then we'll go around the room.
Assemblymember Rivera. Are there any other Assembly members on the phone?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And then we'll go around the table here, starting with Mr. Ruddleson.
Here. Hugh Peterson.
Meg Salazar.
Austin Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Marilyn Bontoff, Office of Management and Budget.
Michelle Frasca, OMB. Courtney Peterson, OMB.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
And we have Ms. Jones from the clerk's office and other members of the administration present. Welcome everyone and members of the public. Thank you for joining us today. I want to note that the documents are available online. If you go to muni.org and click on Assembly, and at the top, click on Assembly Work Sessions and scroll down to today, there are a number of documents, including the presentation that we're about to see. AR 2022-98 and AR 2022-99 are also available online, as is the link to the 2022 budget. And with that, I will turn to Ms. Frasca.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to see the Assembly in person today. And as I know all of you appreciate, as part of the preparation for the first quarter proposal is before you, it takes a village. And I have my villagers with me. I have Marilyn Bontoff and Courtney Peterson. And Christine Chestnut is also online. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to note for the record, we were joined by Ms. Kennedy. Thank you.
So I appreciate them being here. And then also Dan Moore is requested is here from Treasury. So what we're here today to talk to you about is the fine tuning that we go through as part of the mill rate setting process in order to have Treasury send out the property taxes. So with that, we'll go to the first slide and give you an idea of how MOA ended in 2021. So at the end, in terms of fund balance of the 5 major funds, there was about a $2.5 million amount left over, if you will. And that assumes full FEMA reimbursement, which I know the Assembly members are familiar with in terms of the outstanding FEMA requests. There's also an unaudited number as it goes through that process. 2 departments overspent in terms of the end of the year, and that's been reflected in the information that we submit to the Assembly in one of the, what we call our bank forgiveness legislation. Equity and Justice overspent by $14,000, and that's associated with an unanticipated leave cash out. Fire Department overspent $1.3 million, and that's primarily associated with overtime expenditures. And then the bank forgiveness also includes some year-end type adjustments. They don't add to the spending column, but it's workers' compensation, general liability, and then also a room tax payment that's made to the contractor in calendar year 2020, but it applies to 21. So it's part of that adjustment process. And then in terms of where revenues came in, actuals came in $263,000 higher than what was projected by Treasury. And I think that's pretty darn impressive in terms of their accuracy in a crazy world. So next slide. And so it's sort of an overview or a snapshot of where we are in what we have before you in terms of first quarter changes. At first, we do meet our fund balance requirements, the 10% for bond rating purposes and the 2% set aside for emergencies. Revenues, in terms of property taxes, we are $5.8 million under the tax cap. And a lot of that's due to the fact that non-property tax revenues are projected to come in at $11.4 million, more than what was anticipated when the budget was put together last fall. And then spending overall, when compared to last year, is up 3.6 million, which represents a less than a 1% increase in spending.
Do you want to go ahead and take questions for the presentation?
Whatever you prefer.
And before I go to Mr. Constant, I do want to note too that Ms. Allard and Mr. Presberdia are excused from today's work session. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure that the record is clear that that 11.4 million projection by the administration, because the Assembly at the point of the budget actually made its own projection that had those funds established in it in November.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Alatel.
Well, thanks. And this is a question that would be better dealt with later. It'd be fine, but you know, so it says 5.8 million under the tax cap, which is, I guess depending on how you view it, is real. So we have a tax cap, but then the amount we can actually tax is decreased by marijuana taxes go in there, alcohol tax, we get part of that, and then is there alcohol tax?
It's on the outside of the tax
That's
cap.
it, okay. The other side. So marijuana, car rental tax, bed tax, and so on, but it's decreased. So I think what you're saying is from this top one, we're 5.8 million lower because of all those things flowing in. So the real tax cap is after all those non-property tax revenues are in there. That's the way I've always thought of it.
Sure. But and we do have the tax cap calculation in the packet, so we'll be able to talk about that. But this is after you go through all those gyrations, you get to the property taxes allowed,
Right.
after you've taken all those, and this is 5.8 million below what is allowed.
Okay, so that's
Okay?
right. Oh,
Yeah, and their taxes are outside the tax cap too. Just a
So you have this cap, and then you put in all the revenues from all the other stuff, and you get a new number, and you're saying you're 5.8 below that new
Correct.
number.
Correct.
Okay, I look forward to that, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Next is Ms. Alatel and then Mr. Dunbar.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
And then Ms. Kenny.
So as we start to look and build out this conversation, where's our baseline? What are we starting with? Are we starting with the 2022 approved budget by the Assembly after the veto overrides, or are we starting with the 2022 budget that the administration has been working from January? That was the, I guess I would call it the proposed budget.
We're going from the latter.
So not from the one that the Assembly approved after the veto overrides.
We're we're working from the one that had does not include the funds that the CFO could not certify. And so that's the budget from which we are working.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and if the discussion is more appropriate for later about the tax cap, Cheryl, that's fine. But, so this is, your 5 point under the tax cap as calculated today. How much has the tax cap increased between November, December of last year and today? So I think the projected property taxes at least, was at one level, and then I think that number has increased. Is that right? As our tax cap number is higher now than it was when we built the budget back in November, December.
I think we even put that in here.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll have to get
if it's later on, that's fine.
Yeah, first quarter versus on slide 5, first quarter revisions, property taxes to be collected are 2.8 million less than what was anticipated based on the version of the budget that we're working on.
I'm sorry, can you say the slide number?
On page 5,
On page 5.
yeah, under property taxes. So it relies on 2.8 million less than what was reflected in the budget you approved last fall.
Yep, that's the opposite of what you just said.
No, that's not what, yeah, I don't think that's correct. So what I'm saying is, we projected a certain amount of property taxes we could collect under the tax, under the tax cap in November, December. How much has that increased between then and first quarter budget revisions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that chart here. Do we? Yeah, no, we didn't. We can get that out back to you.
Right, so the 5.8 million I believe, is not under what we proposed in November. It's under this new increased tax cap amount, right?
Yeah, it didn't increase that much. Okay, so Marilyn is showing me that you had taxed to the cap, which was $295.9 million. And so this bill, this taxes to 293.1. So 295 was what you approved last year, and so this is 291. 293, excuse me.
So it was, we taxed 295.9, and you're proposing 293 point something.
Right.
That difference is about 2.5 or 2.6. So here you're saying it's $5.8 million of the cap. So I guess from that I can project that the tax cap has increased by $3 million. And so you're calculating this difference between what is now probably almost $299 million is the property tax cap, and you're saying you're $5.8 million under that. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Mr. Dunbar. I'd have to sit down before I'm even willing to say it's correct. I'd have to sit down and look at the numbers.
Okay.
So if you want to take a time out, we can do that.
Well, no, I think we'll keep going. I think on page 12 we'll have that same conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So I have 4 other members in the queue. And I know, Mr. Middleton, you want
Point
to...
of order, I guess. I have a request that Cheryl turn on her mic and speak into it.
Okay.
So they can turn it back.
Did you want to stay in the queue, Mr. Middleton, or was that it? Just okay, thank you. So we'll go next to Ms. Kennedy, then Mr. Constant. Actually, thank you. Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Williamson, and then Mr. Constant. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to get a better handle on the fund balance number at this point, and mostly because it says that these are unaudited numbers on the fund balance, but we had a preliminary number for the end of 2021 of about $58 million deficit. So are we, and obviously that's in regard to reimbursement potential with FEMA. So is that still considered, and I mean, I may be even wrong on that number. I know there have been a couple of different numbers that have been thrown out, but anyway, are we, is there still any kind of a distinction here that we should really be looking at this? I mean, it seems to me that the 2.5 is basically kind of a reflection of the way everything played out in 2021, but it's not necessarily reflective of what is really going to be audited and what would be reflected in like the CAFR. And it's not called the CAFR anymore. I forget what the acronym is for it now. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm going, trying to figure out how we get this number here, but our CAFR number is quite different. So how do I reconcile that? Thanks.
Well, thank you. Ms. Crystal, Ms. Kennedy, this is an unaudited number that does assume that we have FEMA reimbursement as we're requesting. In terms of what the financials may say, that's something that's on the other side of the house, and we don't know for months. So because of the timing, we have to go with the best information we have in order to go through the amendment process to set the property taxes. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the financials to be completed and have an audited number. So this is the best estimate that, working with finance, that they provided that we could have, with the assumption then that FEMA will be reimbursed.
Thank you, but we should probably still be cognizant of the fact that that's potential, it's hanging out there, looming out there somewhere. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for folks who, this budget process is new, or you're trying to track, what Ms. Altel asked was, did the administration follow the charter and use the Assembly's approved budget? And what the administration said is, no, we did not. We just did what the mayor wanted to do anyway. So I just want to make that really clear. We've had a lot of questions. I've had a lot of emails. The Arts Commission arts individuals who usually get community grants reached out to us. We've heard from other people saying, where's the money that was approved by the assembly, the body that approves the budget? And the administration said, oh no, we didn't follow the approved budget. We did what we think is right. And I just want to make it really clear, this is unprecedented. I've never seen this before while I've been in this role, and continues to be disappointing. I hope the administration, now that they've seen that our revenue projections were correct, will get on board with also certifying the programs that were approved in the fall that are waiting to be funded. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davis, and Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Cheryl, I know you're new. You came in halfway through, so in some ways you inherited some of the challenges that you get to be in the hot seat to go through and reconcile in this truing of our budget. And so you said something that I completely agree with, that it's pretty impressive that the Treasury was able to estimate revenue within roughly $250,000, $500 million, or even larger budget, depending on what aperture you look at it from, school district and everything else. And then we face the fact that in December we were able to project right on point, almost within $500,000 of the budget that is proving now to be true. But at the time, the municipality could not certify those monies. So my question is, where is the deficiency in the departments that would be on one side of the house able to project within $250,000 and $500 million budget, and on the other side not be able to say with any certainty, when you have just a team of loose elected officials working with their friends to figure out, we know where the projections are. So where do we work to ensure that the projections are accurate next year as we go through this process?
I think if you look at historically, Treasury has done a fine job of projecting revenues. In my previous tours of duty at the municipality, I don't recall an assembly getting into the revenue projection business. Okay, I realize I haven't been here for the last, 9 years, so that may have changed. So I don't think there's anything broken in terms of the projection process that we have. I do suggest that you revisit the math that you used with your amendments last fall in terms of the room tax. You guys, if we want to get into the details of this, we can, or save that for another time. But I think there's some math issues even with how you did your amendments, that you still didn't have enough money to pay for the things that you appropriated. And be glad to have further discussions about that. But I appreciate your perspective. I respect it. And there may be legal issues that need to be worked through.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on the question of what the charter says in the law. And yeah, maybe the numbers were off in this or that category, but broadly they were quite accurate, our projections. And the reason why the members felt the need to do that was because the members, I believe, felt like we weren't getting an honest appraisal of the budget. Right? There was something going on there, which now we see that the administration had intentions for those dollars. And it certainly raises the perception among people who are following this process that somebody was holding the Easter egg for themselves. And so that's a concern that I have as we walk through this process, is figuring out how, going forward, we have, for example, when we tried to do our traditional process of at least the last 5 to 7 years of working with the administration to establish the priorities and to set forth how we're going to grow and develop and hold the line on the budget and all of the municipal processes, we were rebuffed and told, no, this is our job. And so we just have to figure that out, because it is one municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel?
Thanks, I won't be as nice as Mr. Constant. So when we put the budget forward and we approve it, we take the risk that our math might be bad and that we have to clean it up at first quarter or along the way. I think that is the hard line here. And I think what we've done in this current order of operations is make this first quarter budget revision way harder than it needs to be. What we have to do is we have to go back and reset to the assembly approved budget, and then we can talk about what additional revenues are available. And that is a terribly complex and onerous position for the legislative branch to be in, and it is not what we typically do. And frankly, this is one of the things with April elections. The first thing you encounter as a new member on this body is first quarter budget revisions and setting the mill rate. And it is, I would say, infinitely more complex this year than it needs to be and that it should be, especially for these new members coming on the body. So I wish we weren't in this position, but it's the position we're in. So I'm hoping we can find a way to have this conversation that somehow draws us back to what the approved budget was, and then based on the approved budget by the Assembly, what is the additional revenue we have and what are the proposals for using that revenue? Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Gates?
Yes, thank you. I would like to make one point of clarification. The fund certification issue, certification of projected revenues and all that. That was in reference to the charter. Our charter, from my reading, it says nothing about certifying funds, nothing about fund certification. That's not in our charter at all. What is in the charter is that the Assembly approves the budget as amended, and that throughout the year, the mayor sees that revenues are not going to meet the appropriations. He should report that to the Assembly. The Assembly may decrease the budget. This is in charter at sections 1305 and 1306. So the fund certification issue with current budget, the fund certification of projected revenues, everything that would seem to be the issue here is a function of our code and not a charter.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Seeing no other members in the queue, if you want to go ahead and continue.
Sure, and to Ms. Zalatel's point, if your staff needs help with the math, we can help. To the point where you're trying to get. Okay, so the next slide is the approach that we took to first quarter. We focused on the adjustments, the fine tuning part of the process, and not major program changes. We funded departments with the expectation that they will have the resources available to manage, to come in on or under budget at year end. And I know you've seen over the years, police and fire especially, in terms of overtime being a perennial first quarter item. So our hope is we've added money to those departments so that they will have the resources available for the full year. Contractual obligations, typically that's a first quarter process for the firefighters, AMEA. They have new collective bargaining agreements, which are funded in here. CPI increases in contracts, like the Performing Arts Center, the museum, those kinds of things are included. And then we adjusted revenues based on Treasury's updated forecast.
We've got a question from Mr. Dunbar.
Not so much a question as a comment, and again, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but there's no major program changes if you take the mayor's unilateral budget as the baseline. If you take the 2022 Assembly approved budget, there are major program changes because, for example, we said $1.5 million to the mental health first responders program, and this revised proposal doesn't take that as the baseline. It takes the baseline as what the mayor proposed back in November. So if this mayoral proposal is accepted, there will be major program changes from the 2022 Assembly approved budget, just none from his unilateral version. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant?
Mine might be another bit of a softball, Cheryl. We referenced on this slide the CPI for contract adjustments. What does the current environment of mass inflation do to the framework of our consumer price index process for our budget? It's over 5 years average rolling, so probably not that much yet.
Right.
Okay.
Right, that's correct. And we'll talk about that in the tax cap, but in another place. Okay. All right, in terms of the revenue changes, room tax increased $5.5 million. And keep in mind, there's a corresponding $1.8 million spending increase when we give the money to visit Anchorage, so it's not all available. Property taxes, $2.8 million less in property taxes when compared to our version of the approved budget. We have $2.3 million in school district 2021 property tax over collection. Okay, you may wonder, oh my gosh, what is that about? And so what happens, just because of the fiscal year, it's the school calendar year, the ASD's fiscal year, okay, we go to the taxpayers in June and we collect property taxes for the school district. In October, they do their student enrollment count, on which the state bases its payment to the school district. There is a ceiling on the amount that a local community can contribute to the school district. And so what happens is, in this case, we were unable to give the entire amount collected, at least anticipated to be collected, for school purposes to the district because we were at that ceiling of the maximum amount. So as a result, we over-collected $2.3 million in property taxes, which we are proposing be returned in another way to taxpayers to help pay for services under this budget.
Mr. Constant?
Thanks. That was your last little phrase there was exactly where my mind was at. So it's not really practicable to return the money to the taxpayers because people die, things change, properties are sold. So what's the mechanism for the return?
It means that there's $2.3 million from this hand, instead of collecting an additional $2.3 in new taxes.
For the school district
For
next year?
municipality. I mean, we can't, we're governed by how much we can contribute to the school district by state law.
I understand
Yeah.
that. And so, right, so the money is in their budget and we would send, are we proposing to use it for other municipal taxpayer issues or school district issues? Like, is that for funding next year's pool by $2.3 million so that we would collect that much less for the school district?
So we're also, well, I guess we could go through some gyration. I have to think about how it might work. But we're also, it's not that we thought about, well, could we give it to the school district, still give it to them. But again, that would be exceeding the maximum amount that we can give them. You can give it to them for, what is it, for food, nutrition programs and maintenance. And I think there's one other purpose, not classroom related, or instruction related.
So possibly school resource officers?
No,
Why not?
because that's part of their budget.
No, it's our budget. We hire them to fund the staff and the police. I don't, am I wrong?
We were told that's not a purpose for which we could contribute to the school district's budget. You just said.
Oh, you're right, to keep it, okay, that's fair from my previous question, but
Yeah.
just, so I see two ways. One would be to fund school resource officers would be great, solve some headaches for people at least for the next year, or one would be prepay some percentage of next year's levy for the school district from those refunded dollars, so that we don't have to collect that much for the school district for the next year. Seems pretty straightforward, but I'd love to hear how.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Go ahead, Lane.
Investment income, an adjustment downwards of $500,000, as well as an increased cost for TANs. And again, this is a change from the budget as it was before you last fall. And then the MOA trust fund contribution, the investment advisory commission recommended the formula be, I think it's 4% of market value payout. Dan's here to correct that, which resulted in a $2.1 million reduction in the amount of coming from the MOA trust fund. And this was before the assembly, probably a month or two ago, in the form of an AIM, which you accepted, the commission's recommendation.
Do you have a question or a comment, Mr. Dunbar?
Well, at the time, actually, remember, I asked Dan if we accept this AIM, does it actually do this? Because you have to come back to us with an ordinance to change that. And so as much as I know, well, we have an ordinance set at 4.5. You didn't come back to us with an ordinance to change it to 4, right?
I believe it says up to.
Yeah, the ordinance, the code is written, it's not to exceed 4.5%. So we can actually be below that without actually changing the code.
Okay, so we built a budget last year that said we're going to take 4.5, and then the administration has decided we're going to switch that to 4. And you know, the assembly, we might have said, well, we want to smooth this out. We're going to do 4.25 this year and 4 next year. We're going to step off. But you're saying the administration is saying, no, in this version at least, we've just decided we're going to 4.
Correct. We're recommending, and this is a budget, was based on a prudent investment policy.
So can I ask, if we said, no, we're gonna do 4.25 this year and 4 next year, and we put that in our amendments for this, what actually happens? Are you going to follow that recommendation, or are you gonna say, no, we're keeping it 4 because that's what we decided?
That would be a mayor's call.
Yeah, I think the trust fund is this is Dan Moore from Treasury. I'm a sole fiduciary for the trust.
Dan.
And I'm a sole fiduciary for the trust, for the Illinois Trust. And I have to listen to our investment consultant.
Come over
also.
here, Mr. Ford, if you would.
Sorry.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, where did that?
Felix,
Felix,
take
stay
over
under
that,
it,
he just
yeah.
can't.
Actually, it sounds like you're coming up to the microphone.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Is the microphone on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my name is Dan Moore, City Treasurer, and I'm also the sole main fiduciary per charter for the Illinois Trust Fund. So the trust fund really has to be, the primary objective is to maintain the purchasing power of the trust fund. The trust fund is in the hole when it comes to its purchasing power at the moment, and we all should be aware of that because the market's been very volatile, very negative, plus you have inflation that's been terrible. You combine those two numbers, and we are probably at minus 14% this year. It makes 0 sense to delay or to ratchet down to 4%. The sooner we get there, the better. And that's my view as the sole fiduciary for the trust fund. The assembly can approve whatever you want to approve, but I have a duty, a fiduciary duty to do the right thing. And I listened, we went through a very detailed process with the Investment Commission, and it is extremely clear to me it needs to be at 4.0% ASAP. So that's the position that I'm taking.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Zalato?
Thank you. Actually, I have a question for council. So my question is, in order to set the rate to be taken from the trust fund, do we do that by resolution then? Or is simply accepting the AIM setting the rate? Because if there's action to be taken, we should make sure we take that concurrent with what we're using in the first quarter budget revisions.
The question, as I understand it, is whether the, I guess, return 4% towards the max 4.5 can be done by resolution or by an AIM, or which is the instrument the assembly use.
So I guess it's 2 questions. Is it a policy choice by the assembly? And if so, how do we express our policy choice? And it may be a question where you need to get back to us, but I think it's a pertinent question we need to explore as we move through 1Q.
Yeah, and I think that question is too important for me to answer off the cuff right here on the spot. So I'd like a little time before I do start. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zalato. Thank you, Mr. Gates.
Yes, thank you. Okay, the next line is other additional revenue changes. The permanent fund dividend garnishment and counter fines because of the higher dividend / energy check that's being discussed. That will provide for another $3.1 million in revenues to MOA. Ambulance fees, this is the supplemental emergency medical transport. We adjusted the revenues based on 21 actuals, plus an application that was submitted to the state of Alaska regarding regarding 2019 activities. So as a result of those, an additional $1.7 million. In land sales, increased land sales, another $907,000. And then building permits, the revenues of which go into the building service area, an additional $628,000.
So I've got 2 members in the queue. First is Mr. Constant and then Ms. Zalato.
Thank you. So the ambulance fees, is this chief the first time these revenues have really hit the books? Because I know we started that program pretty recently and we were ramping up. This is Medicaid billable fees for transport.
there was some money included in the 2022 budget during your deliberations last fall.
So I just
And
want
we're
to say
adjusting that.
thank you and congratulations, because this is something that has long been needed, and it really is an important function, which will hopefully go to resolving some overtime questions. We get to actual budget for these services and they pay for themselves. Unusual and good development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constance. Ms. Zellerfeld?
Thank you. On the garnishment, with the higher amount coming from the legislature, I would double check, and I'm actually uncomfortable with assuming that it's one lump sum and not dividing the two out, because I believe that the energy rebate won't be subject to garnishment as part of its passage.
Dan Moore may be able to contribute to that.
May as well stay there.
Get comfortable, Dan.
Yeah.
I'll bring myself over here. So Dan Moore from Treasury. We have a whole history on the PFD garnishment, and back in, gosh, I want to say it was 2008 maybe, when there was an energy credit under Governor Palin. We did submit for garnishment, and we did receive an increased garnishment that included that payment.
I appreciate that, and I've also heard specific talk in the legislature that they are going to possibly make it immune to garnishment. So I just want us to be, if we want to be cautious, this would be one of those places to possibly do so.
Okay.
And we do have them separated, the numbers for you.
Thank you, Ms. Zellerfeld. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay. The non-property taxes that are included under the tax cap, in terms of changes from what you saw last fall, motor vehicle rental tax of $1.7 million, tobacco tax $1.2 million, marijuana $200,000. You read these, I realize. Misa payments, a drop of $742,000. Motor vehicle registration taxes down $800,000, and fuel taxes projected to be down $80,000.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I get a little bit more detail on the fall in Visa? Is that predominantly SWS or AWU, or kind of what's the breakdown there and what's driving the fall?
We can get back to you with that, instead of me rummaging through my notes, unless it's important to know right now.
No, it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
that would be great.
yeah, we'll get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And Mr. Constance?
Thanks. So that's interesting, the fuel tax going down, that's counterintuitive. When the prices have gone up so high, are people driving less, or what's the reality there? You know, you can get back later for that.
Dan can help you with that, but remember that the fuel tax is based on per gallon, not price.
That's right.
That's
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 really
right.
nice.
It's not a percentage.
That makes sense.
Okay, so now the next favorite slide is the tax cap calculation, which is a green piece of paper in your packet. We're having a little technical difficulty, but you wouldn't be able to read it anyway, I don't think. So again, this is what you've seen before, in terms of calculating the tax cap. The bigger changes are on lines 9 and 10 on the tax cap itself. And again, that's the plus 9.9 million in PILTs, but a loss of 9.3 million in use of Visa, and that's associated with the change from ML&P not paying on USA and the fact that Chugash pays a PILT. So in the end, it's pretty net zero. And then we were talking earlier about line 22, the change due to consumer price index. So you can see that because we use the 5-year average, the tax caps increased 1.7% this year. So there's a smoothing out of the change over time. So that resulted between that and the change in the population. The net was almost $3 million increase in the tax cap itself. In terms of other significant changes, the motor vehicle rental tax, that's $3.2 million of an increase compared to the tax cap calculation of last year. Again, we've talked about PILT. So we get down to line 47. Is that okay to keep going like this? All right, you okay? Line 47, the limit on property taxes that can be collected is the $297.9 million, which is a $1.2 million increase when compared to the tax cap last year. In terms of the limit on the property taxes, because then we've added in the ASD, unused tax limit capacity of $991 million, which brings us on line 51 to the limit of the property taxes that can be collected within the tax cap, which is the $298.9 million, for an increase of almost $1.2 million when compared to last year's tax cap. So when you boil it down to the property taxes to be collected under the proposal that we have before you, the total is $293 million, which is $4.6 million less than the amount of property taxes collected last year, and brings us to $5.8 million below the tax cap.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Frasca. This is the number I was asking for at the very beginning, with this 298.8, so basically $299 million. And as you said at the beginning, so you told me that the tax cap number we used when we set the budget back in November, December was 295.9, I think was the number we gave. And so basically what you're saying is the tax cap from when we did it in the fall has jumped about $3 million, has increased about $3 million. And then we are now, this proposal is now 5.8 million under that higher threshold.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not 5.8 million under what we proposed in this fall. It's 5.8 million under this new higher threshold, which is $3 million more than we had to work with back in the fall.
Yeah, that was a preliminary tax cap calculation.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
All right. Okay. So now we move into the spending side of what we proposed. And Marilyn's having some technical difficulties, but the slides won't advance, so we apologize for those that are relying on the boards. In terms of the spending side, we have fire department, police department. Fire department, we're proposing an additional $2.9 million, of which 2.5 of that is for overtime. Then the funding for their new firefighter contract is an additional $965. And then we were also able to have a savings in the amount that's paid to AWWU for hydrant maintenance. And this is the result of an RCA decision. And the cost of this $620,000 cost is going to be paid by AWWU's charging commercial properties. But it does save taxpayers those dollars. In the police department, over $2.7 million, of which $2.5 million is associated with overtime. And then they do have two contracts that have the CPI, the Anchorage Jail, $192,000, and the Girdwood Police Services contract of $33,100.
Mr. Constant?
Thank you. So with the approved spending, assuming the fire department appropriations are made, does that then project out a budget that we anticipate we won't see at the end of the year, an unbudgeted overtime number, so that next year people don't feel bad about having to provide essential services to the community?
This is intended to allow them to get to the full year and come in on budget or under budget.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next is Ms. Quinn-Davidson and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Ms. Frasca, is on the green sheet, sort of toward the bottom, line 49, the 991,378 number, is that part of the ASD 2.3 million?
No.
Okay.
This is just the capacity, the authority to collect taxes. The 2.3 million was taxes that had been already collected in June, that because of the state limit on how much we could contribute to the schools, we couldn't contribute. So that's real money, and this is capacity to collect taxes.
Okay, and so was that 2.3 then built into, where did that 2.3 go?
we're proposing to contribute it to fund balance, if you will.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
so it's part of all of these calculations. It's
We're
included in.
relying on that.
Okay.
Relying on that
Got it.
money to help pay
Thank
for
you.
services.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Next is Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Alatal.
Thanks. So we shortchanged Girdwood Fire Rescue, I think just about 13,000 with the previous budget on our agreement with them. Is that fixed?
I don't think so. Well, let us get back to you, because we were just talking about that before we came down here. I think it's a different item, but let me get back to you
Sure.
on that, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Alatal?
Thank you. I think it's important when we're talking about the fire department, not to call that overtime. It's the way the payroll is structured, frankly. And so I really don't like calling that, I would prefer it be called payroll, because it's not that we're incurring overtime because we're doing something different operationally or there's some particular need. And overtime is usually assumed as something maybe more extraordinary or a one-off. Like, you have to, your boss makes you work overtime. That's not the case with the fire department. It's the way their shifts are structured. And then I would like that same clarification on police overtime. Is it because we don't have enough officers? Is there a lot of one-off situations that are requiring people to work outside their normal routines? Or this is all routine? I think it's payroll.
Thank you, Ms. Alatal.
So if I could clarify, also in the fire department, a lot of that is related to leave cash-in. So do you think that's payroll or? Okay.
It's definitely payroll and benefits. It's not due to some new additional thing being required.
Okay. So
Thank you, Ms. Alatal.
Other major spending changes in this proposed package includes the CAMA Go Live, the city's property assessment program, as well as some support-related costs. Maintenance and operations, increased utilities and facility contract costs. The museum and performing arts center contract increase, and then the city hall lease has a every 5 years there's a CPI adjustment, and it's due this year for $250,000.
Yeah, I just want to make a pitch for us figuring out a better deal. We bought this building 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it's all profits for a third-party property owner. The municipality is a real estate entity, and we shouldn't be buying this building any more times. We've already bought it, but we continue to pay it as a leasehold, and it makes me crazy. And that number right there is on top of the, $6 million we're already paying every year for this building, which this building is probably valued at now $6 million. And so every year we're buying this building, or every couple of years. We should buy a building and just be done with this conversation, because that number is painful to me.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Trainee, we appreciate that comment. Ms. Grassley?
Okay. Other major spending changes, we have added $685,000 we proposed for ASB pools. Okay, the funds would go to the Parks Department for the purposes of operating the pools. We did what we call a scrub of all of the city's labor costs, and the result of that scrub is really a truing up of matching the people who are in the positions and what they're actually being paid versus what they had been budgeted. And as a result of that scrub, we were able to identify $2.4 million in savings. And not one position was, not one employee lost a job as a result of that, or will lose a job as a result of the scrub. Overall, there are 9 new positions being requested. There's 7 associated with the pools, 1 in the municipal manager's office, and 1 in OMB.
So I have Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Dunbar, and then Ms. Alatal in the queue. Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, thanks. So on the pools, there's a couple of things. You have more money, and then you also have 7 new people. Is that, so can we expect more public use of the service on pool?
We have
Not
to
to
talk
be
to the
specific.
public about that. Pardon?
Not to get too specific, but I mean, is this to increase use, or is this to kind of break?
To keep them open. because the mayor, as I've been told, that the mayor's budget did not have the funds in it for the pools. Was this one of the back and forths? I have to ask you guys. Okay, so he's thought about it, reflected, and chose to add back the funds so the pools can stay open.
Okay, so it's basically break even. That's so good, thanks.
No, we didn't do the pools, actually.
Okay. Okay, good
I
point.
complained about
No, we complained, but.
We didn't take action.
Just a general complaint. Okay, sorry. Yeah, we didn't.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Dunbar and then Ms. Ellisell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious how the labor scrub interacts, if it does at all, with the hiring freeze. And, sure, nobody's losing their job now, but does that include, are we sort of scrubbing positions that we would have hired back last summer, but for the hiring freeze?
No, the hiring freeze is not, the hiring freeze, not hiring somebody doesn't enter into the scrub.
Okay.
If the position was budgeted, it's still budgeted, but we just adjust steps.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Ellisell and then Mr. Peterson.
So I think I'm gonna ask Mr. Dunbar's question in another way. Did the labor scrub savings eliminate any vacant positions?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not the purpose of it. It's really, a truing up. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Ellisell.
Can I ask? Oh, awesome.
Mr. Peterson, and then we'll go to Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so is some of the scrub savings possibly because we haven't been able to get applicants for some of the open positions? That seems to be a problem pretty much everywhere that I've been told. Thank you.
Good question, because some of it is a result of the, what do you call it, the Great Resignation, that we had a lot of people leave. And when new people are hired, they come in typically at a lower grade. And so that's a lot of what this was, is the matching up over time of what happened. But we didn't delete positions that were unfilled. So that's didn't feed into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
I'm good. Yeah, sure.
Great, thanks.
Okay, and then the one last item on this slide is an open item, fuel cost increases. And so what you won't see in here is our request to cover fuel cost increases at this time. Our proposal is to have that be part of the ARPA package. So we will be back to you as we shift gears. If you outright reject that opportunity, then we'll need to factor in some fuel. We'll have to get estimates from the departments regarding fuel cost increases.
Mr. Thompson.
Thanks. Do you have a sense of scale of that number?
Not yet. We're in the process of gathering it up.
Ballpark millions?
I can't.
You don't know? Okay.
Okay. All right. In summary, in terms of spending, this is a comparison that again from first quarter last year to first quarter this year, $10.9 million difference. In terms of property taxes, this is it doesn't include the limited service areas. There's a savings, quote unquote, or less 4.6 million. In terms of mill levy, 1.34 million decrease. What it translates into in terms of assessed value is $134 savings per $100,000 of assessed value, or the average assessed value home is $420,000. It's a $563 savings. At the BAC yesterday, Mr. Dunbar did ask if we use the 2021 assessed value and the taxes to be collected in 2022, what would be the difference on the in terms of taxes to be paid. So it would be a $38 savings on a home of $420,000 assessed value, or a difference of 0.09 mils. Okay.
So next.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar, and then we have Ms. Ellisell.
I think you mean 0.9 mils, but we'll get here. So at the BAC, you used a different number for that first column. You used 295 million instead of 297 million in that presentation. And can you recall why you used that one instead of this one?
If I did, Mr. Dunbar, it would be my typo because I was screwing around with this slide today, and I will get back to you with what the correct number is.
I think what you did was use what we talked about before, the number that was the 2022 proposed, or I said 2022 adopted by the Assembly. I think you used that number in that column, 295.9, and or something like that. And now it's been switched to 297.7. I think I actually agree that this is probably the more accurate number, but it is different. And so what I asked you for was, so we see that there's about a 1.5% reduction from column 1 to column 2 in terms of property taxes to be collected. The 4.6 million is about 1.5% of 297.7 million. But you see the mill rate change is much larger than that. It's about a 5.6% change. And so what I asked the BAC for, and I have a little bit of advantage with my colleagues because I already saw the resolution yesterday, is if we kept it at the 297.7 million, what would be still the fall in the mill levy? Because clearly something other than this difference here is driving the change in the mill levy. And as you said at BAC, what's driving that change is the very large increase in the assessment, right? So did you just give me that answer and say that if you were at that 4.6 back in, there would still be a mill levy decrease of 0.9 instead of 1.34?
No, I won't say. But if you want us to do a calculation, we will.
That was what I asked you yesterday.
I misunderstood, but because what you asked was if we took last year's assessed value, property taxes to be collected this year as we proposed, what impact would it have? And that's the number that I provided.
Okay, that was just a miscommunication.
Okay.
That wasn't what I was asking for.
Oh, okay.
What I was asking for, and again, there was a different number on this slide at the BAC, so I understand if maybe it's a little bit confusing. But that $4.6 million change doesn't explain the 1.34 fall in the mill. It's maybe 20% of that change, or maybe 30% of that change. And so if the property taxes to be collected were at 297.7 million, divided by the new total assessment, what's our new fall in the mill rate? And I think that's what you just said, it's 0.9. So instead of 1.34, it would be 0.9. It wouldn't be 0, because there's no way that 4.6 million can explain that 1.34.
Well, I think the other piece of this, that the other moving part, is that the mill levy, that's general government and ASD.
Well, that's a totally separate issue, because I do know that was the question that was asked of you yesterday. That was the preliminary question we asked, was what percentage of that 1.34 is explained by school bond debt reimbursement and by the failure of the school bond. And you said it doesn't explain it at all.
I know, because the cost for those bonds doesn't appear in this June's tax bill. It would be when the bonds are sold in the future.
Okay, so the 6.35, you're saying that's the combined mill rate of both the school district and general government?
The 16.35?
16.35, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's new information. That's the combined rate. So, again, I'm still asking for kind of, if that $4.6 million goes away and we're back to that 297.7, what is the change in the mill rate for the taxpayer?
We'll get back to you on that. I don't do math on the fly.
Okay. Well, I just think it's a really important number for us to know, because we want to lower the mill rate. But that 4.6 million is only a small part of that 1.34, and we need to know that calculation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure, and if I could just remind you, with the Budget and Finance Committee a couple months ago, we had a great discussion where we walked through how you calculate the mill rate. And there's two variables, property taxes to be collected and assessed valuation. It's pure math. So you can't do anything about assessed valuation unless there's appeals. So how you impact the mill rate is the amount of property taxes to be collected.
Right.
If you collect more property taxes, the mill rate will go up. So
it'll go up, but it'll still be a reduction from the last time. Because look, the mayor's office is claiming that there's a 1.34 fall in the mills, and it's going to save $134 per 100,000 per person. But what you just said, I think is true, is that there's this huge increase in the assessment. And so the practical impact on property tax is a little bit different. And so we have to know what that delta actually is. You know, what does the $4.6 million reduction actually mean? Or is most of those savings that the mayor's office is claiming, are those mostly being driven by the school bond debt reimbursement and by the change in the assessment? And what I'm trying to figure out is what percent is driven by those two factors and what percent is driven by this $4.6 million?
Yeah. School district bond debt does drive a lot of the savings too.
Okay, thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next is Ms. Zalatel and then Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hate to ask you for anything after that conversation, but the piece I'm missing is a middle column. What I need is 2022 approved budget as approved by the Assembly, placed in those three columns, and then I can see where that compares to your 2022 first quarter. Because right now I don't have enough visibility on the starting point to know whether or not the changes proposed in first quarter are headed in the right direction. Thanks.
What is that, 2019, 20? That's a joke.
No, no more than what we need to know in this moment. But I think it's important because I think it tells, when we just look first quarter to first quarter, we're missing where we're actually starting from for this first quarter. And I think we need that middle piece in there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I think my questions are sort of along the line of Forrest, not all of the stuff he asked, but just that last bit, which is the 134 savings per 100,000 assessed value. Sounds really good to the public, right? It's like, oh, great, that number's dropping. But everyone's assessed values went up. So it's sort of this illusory drop in property taxes, because, you know, if my house went from, I think my house was 360 when I bought it, you know, and it went up to 400, obviously, even if the mill levy goes down, I'm maybe paying the same amount. So that's your impression too, right, Ms. Frasca, that I'm not misunderstanding that.
Sure, and the less property taxes you collect.
Right, yeah.
The less property taxes citizens pay.
Right, but if you guys only have a reduction of a couple $1 million, or even if it's 4.8, that doesn't mean that much money is going to be reduced on everyone's property tax bill, because everyone's assessments, I mean, we know that this is happening in Anchorage, right? Houses are worth more, assessments are going up. So I guess when you put this 563 on an average of 420, which my house is below average now, 563, that accounts for the bond debt reimbursement, right?
The bond debt reimbursement, the savings?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the property tax savings that we're seeing, I would say is mostly from the fact that the state is going to pay for bond debt reimbursement, not because of some calculation that was done here or what the municipality is doing.
Well, there's multiple factors that contribute to the amount of property taxes to be collected. And certainly paying debt and reimbursement is one of them.
Do you, can you estimate for me what percentage of the savings is attributed to the bond debt reimbursement payment?
I don't have that on hand, but we'll definitely get back to you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. So next is Mr. Constant and then Mr. Dunbar.
So following up on that question, this is the answer to that question will impact the answer to this question. You know, the answer to this now, but what happens if the governor vetoes again the bond debt reimbursement? So that, you know, I mean, practically speaking, if we probably should understand the fiscal ramifications of what that means, because, you know, we're getting emails that the mayor is soliciting now, pass his budget that will save us $134 per 100,000, but with one swipe of one pen, one man could in fact cut that number in half or some other factor that we'll get beaten up for in the public square. But we worked with everybody to get that money in there and our own legislators. So it would be nice to understand that number to make sure that we have the ability to educate the public on what happens if the governor exercises his right.
Okay, we'll do.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ms. Rasky, could you say again, you gave me that number 0.09, and so I think you actually did answer my question, I just didn't realize it when you did it.
Yeah.
What is that 0.09 number? Can you say that again?
It's using 2021 assessed value and 2022 property taxes to be collected. Translates into a $38 savings on a $420,000 average assessed value home, which is equal to 0.09 mil decrease.
Right, so I think that is either the number or close to the number that we're talking about here, that 4.6 million. I think if you were to take the 0.09 and subtract it from 1.34, you end up with 1.25. I think what you're saying is that 1.235 reduction in mills is everything else. Is school on debt reimbursement, is any other changes from the school district. And so this $4.6 million is driving 0.09 mil reduction, and then the 1.25 is everything else.
And the 0.09 is just the general government part too, which I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So the 0.09 is this $4.6 million. That's just our general government portion of this total reduction. The 1.25 is everything else. Okay, that's interesting. So, yeah, that's how we're looking. That's what we're looking at here. So the $125 per 100,000 of this reduction of $134 is actually unrelated to this $4.6 million reduction in the properties that we're going to collect for the general. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Zalatow?
Thanks. I just have to state it in a simpler way than Mr. Dunbar to make sure I understand, which is the 0.09 mill rate is the general government reduction, which equals $38 savings on a $420,000 assessed home.
That was using the 2021 assessed value.
Yep.
And 22 property taxes.
And when we calculate the mill rate this year, what assessed value will we use?
22.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatow. Mr. Constant?
That's probably a question for Dan. And this is a philosophical question, really. It's got not much to do with anything, but do you know of any jurisdictions that have done something like we do with our revenues from our trust, 5-year rolling averages, and looked at property assessed values in that way? Because probably we could eliminate some uncertainty over time if we were to provide some kind of a 5-year perspective on a property's value instead of every year it's up, down, whatever the market is doing. It strikes me that there might be a way to equalize some of this budget process in the long term, but probably it's a crazy idea. No one's ever done it. Forget about it. But what are your thoughts?
Stan Moore from Treasury. I really can't speak to that. That's much more of an assessor question. So I'm not aware of what you just described, but I am also not an expert. I'm not so tuned into that. So Jackademus, I think, is due to be confirmed in the future, and that'd be a good question to ask him. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Okay, now we're moving to alcohol tax. So at the end of 2021, there was an unaudited amount of $7.7 million that had been unspent. And so that remains in the alcohol tax fund balance. Okay, so it's isolated in its own fund. We've introduced a resolution to request appropriation of $1.3 million of that fund balance remaining, which is it's a little less than the amount that went unspent for shelters that we appropriated to the Navigation Center for contribute to its construction. And so the balance that would remain in the fund balance from prior year is $6.4 million. Treasury has updated its projection for 2022 to add another $1.65 million in additional revenues. And in our first quarter proposed package, we propose to allocate $598 million to the child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence category, $971,000 to the homelessness, mental health, substance abuse category, and $105,000 towards administration.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Thank you. So maybe 6 weeks ago or so, I emailed Ms. Zambosky and asked if you all could produce a spreadsheet that showed for 2021, what was funded, or how much money we had, what the Assembly approved for appropriations, and then where all that went and what was left. I don't think we've seen that yet. Would you be able to give that to us?
Sure, we can work on it. Yeah, I
Great.
haven't seen the request, so I'll follow up.
Okay. Yeah, so, because for us, it's interesting to know if we have $7.7 million left, that means that much money didn't go toward programs, right? Correct. Domestic violence, sexual assault, whatever the thing is. And I think that, that's partly when I was in the mayor role and partly now, because we were dealing with COVID, there's a lot going on. So I understand, I just want to know what was funded and what wasn't. And then when it says 1.65 million above the updated projection, is that above the Assembly's correct projection for the alcohol tax or the administration's incorrect projection? You can answer it a different way if you want, but.
We went with the Treasury's projection.
So the administration. So is this 1.65 added, is that about where the Assembly estimated then?
Yeah, I apologize, but I did not look back at what your
okay. I
point
can
in
ask
time
Mr.
was.
Wilson. Dan, do you know?
Hey, could you please repeat your question? Sorry.
This says a $1.65 million increase to the projection for the 2022 alcohol tax. Ms. Braska just said that was a 1.65 increase above what the administration had predicted, which we know was low. How does that check out? And I actually don't know the answer to this question. I'm just trying to figure out how does that check out to what the Assembly adopted as a revenue projection?
Through the chair to Ms. Quinn-Davidson, this is Dan Moore, Treasury. I don't recall off the top of my head exactly what the number was that the Assembly had proposed late last year. I do recall it was very close to what we were expecting. The very first year of alcohol tax was just 11 months, so we knew we were missing the month of January. And since I guess the November timeframe of last year, we saw how January came in, so that gave us some good information. This should reflect the incremental increase that we proposed to OMB, and I believe it was really, we were all in very similar ballpark, not really a lot of variance there. And I will say, just in general about revenues, the Treasury Finance Department have always been the source of revenue estimation, okay? So I've been here 29 years and I've never seen the Assembly be the authority on revenues. The way it's worked over the years is Treasury's asked for revenue updates twice a year. We provide that to OMB. OMB then puts that into the mix of the budget, then they present that to the mayor, and then the mayor decides whatever he or she desires for their budget, and then it goes to the Assembly for, debate and all that kind of stuff. So the actual source of revenue, the analysis, the deep history, knowledge, whatever, it really needs to stay with Treasury. I mean, we have sound basis for the numbers we give, and we're off all the time. I mean, the close 2021 number was luck. Okay, there were some major pluses and major minuses in the millions of dollars. They just happened to net to about 300,000. So anyway, that's just something to share. Thank you.
The reason I was asking that is because I was wondering if there's even more money than we thought to work with. So I'll just have to look back at what the numbers are.
There's maybe just a little bit more, yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn-Davidson. And before I go on to Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Ellertal, and Mr. Constant, I do want to note that per Ms. Quinn-Davidson's request for information about the programs that were not funded with the alcohol tax money that were appropriated to be funded, that was a request too from the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting. So I just want to reiterate that, and it would be very helpful if we could get that quickly. So next is Mr. Dunbar, and then Ms. Zolotel and Mr. Constant.
So I have a question for Mr. Moore and then a question for Ms. Fraska. And I agree with you, Dan. You know, in the vast majority of cases, I think that's right. I think we had a couple of really unique things happen last year. We had the COVID pandemic, which devastated the bed tax, and then we didn't have a good sense of how quickly that would recover. And we had a whole new tax, the alcohol tax. I will say, you know, I thought our projections were really reasonable. And so I am sort of wondering, you know, if we bring something to you that seems reasonable, you know, to what degree do you want to change your calculations? You know, for example, I don't think that anywhere in here does it mention the fact that the legislature, as it passed the House at least right now, has increased the community, what do you call it? The what's that?
Community dividends.
Yeah, the community assistance payment, I think from 1.7 to like almost 7 million. That's not even in here. And so if we bring something like that to you, I hope the administration is open to hearing those kind of things. Do you happen to know, my actual question is, do you happen to know with this up 1.65 million, I'm sure it's needed somewhere else, what is the total projected amount now for 2022 alcohol taxes?
Ms. Danmore, I believe it's in my folder over there, but it's somewhere around 15.2 million, somewhere in that range.
So, thank you. So the number, I was able to get it, the number that the Assembly used last year was 14.8 million. And I said at the time, I think this is conservative. I think we're going to go above this. And I'm really glad to hear that we have. My question for Ms. Fraska is, so here you see this increase of $598,000 for child sex abuse and domestic violence. Is that an increase over the 2022 approved budget, or is that an increase over the mayor's version of the budget?
Mayor's version.
Okay, so it's actually a cut then, because we had proposed $2 million, the mayor cut it to $1 million, and now he's saying, well, we're increasing it to 1.6 presumably. That's still $4 million under where the Assembly is trying to put it, or $400,000, I'm sorry.
She probably doesn't know.
Yeah.
Was that a question?
I guess it. No, I guess it wasn't. I guess it's a statement. It's actually a cut to what the Assembly approved budget was, or at the very least, because I know there was a sort of interim like approved amount where some things were like in between the two, and so maybe now this is increasing it from the mayor's unilateral number to what we had already passed. But I don't have those in front of me either. But okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next, go ahead, Mr. Moore, and then we'll go to Ms. Zolotel and then Mr. Constant.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a follow-up to Mr. Dunbar. The actual projection that was provided by Treasury and would have been factored in by OMB for alcohol tax in 2022, this is our revised number. It looks like it's 15.35 million, and that's for the tax itself. In addition to that, there is penalty and interest that is collected for any non-compliant operator, and that's about $80,000 that's budgeted. In the very first year of alcohol tax, we had about $128,000 of penalty and interest. There were some non-compliant operators. We're down to just a couple at this point, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for planning purposes, the updated projection, which if you take the new projection, the fees, penalties, all of those things, from what the Assembly's approved budget was, it looks like we have $615,000 that is what we would consider updated numbers. And that should we be considering, I guess what I'm trying to get at is what's one-time money here and what's recurring, or should we consider all of these one-time monies? Because what we have is an updated projection that exceeded the Assembly's projection. So I guess I want some clarification. Can we consider the $615,000 closer to recurring revenues and the other $7.7 million as one-time?
If Cheryl wants me to respond again.
Well, go ahead,
I can
Dan.
be
Go
real
ahead.
quick.
Yeah.
Through the chair, Ms. Zolotel. Yes, it's recurring money. You can rely on that. December came in very strong, stronger than expected, and January was a solid month.
But then, if I could, that doesn't mean that then there's another, that you can expect on a recurring basis an additional 7.7 million.
Yeah, that's why I was making the distinction
Yes,
between the
yes.
two pots of money. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I want to go back to a comment you made, Dan. about how you wanted to, you cautioned this body that we should be careful to stick with the Treasury's professionals who do these estimates and come up with draft budgets and work with the mayor, as you said. Then it comes to the assembly, and I want to provide caution to the administration that in the last budget process, we were told to stay in the truck. We've got this. And that is not how this municipality is supposed to operate. The assembly has the fiduciary responsibility to pass, adopt, correct, and levy a budget, not the administration. And so the actual outcome of the process from last year that we're still facing, because our budget has not yet been loaded into the system, and we're doing first quarter revisions based on the mayor's proposed as opposed to our adopted budget, is that if the Treasury wants to be respected in the process for its expertise, it needs to respect the assembly for its role in the process. That's where I see the functional breakdown of where we're at right now. And I do trust your numbers, except when they don't seem to be reasonable. And it's not you personally, it's the process, and I understand that there are so many variables on the other side of the table. But practically speaking, if, again, our team, working together through committees and various processes, can come up with a number that gets closer to true than what is done, and we do that because we are not being heard in our fiduciary responsibility, then the answer to that is to be heard and not to continue in a process where these things are developed without us and then we're told you don't get a say. To me, that's the highest caution that I can offer from this side of the table.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Okay, now we move to the utilities and enterprises. In terms of year end, all of the utilities and enterprises came in under budget. In terms of expenses, they were all over in terms of the revenues that they collected as budgeted, except for solid waste services. So there was two areas: refuse collection got decrease in residential revenues, and investment income also was less than budgeted. And then on the disposal side, there was a decrease in their revenue, which was somewhat offset by commercial and residential community recycling fees, and then the investment income was higher due to landfill closure fund earnings in terms of where they ended up.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton?
So we had added back into the mayor's proposal some funding for Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, and I tried to dig up where it was. I think what we did is there was none in the utilities, and we put back the amounts that they had historically paid. Has that been retained?
Mr. Weddleton, I'll need to find out. So you want to know if in the approved budget for 21 or
Well, we did
22?
a budget, last fall.
Okay, in
It
22.
was completely wiped out.
Okay.
But in previous years, the utilities had paid into,
For
paid some
AEDC,
part of
yeah.
AEDC, and then it came up substantially short, but I don't want to fall back from there.
Okay, I'll find out.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Kennedy and then Ms. Zalato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is in regard to the investment income. Can you remind me what that can be used for? Is that something that they can use outside of the actual closure fund, or does that have to get rolled back into the corpus?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Good question, and I'll have to find out. Unless Christine, who's online, do you know the answer, Christine?
It is, the investment income is coming from the municipal cash flow earnings. And so those funds can be used to support any operational expenses as far as there.
For the disposal, for solid waste services.
For the land closure fund?
For the landfill closure fund? Well, let us get back to you.
Okay.
The landfill closure fund money that is recognized in the landfill closure fund can only be used for landfill closure fund purposes.
So it goes back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Zalato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel a little bit like a broken record here, but where are we starting from with these projections? Are we starting from the mayor's proposed or the assembly approved?
Again, didn't endure that, so let me get that.
Okay.
We went through all that.
We did with some.
Don't worry, you'll have another chance.
We did some, because the composting was a big one for me, and I added it back in. I don't know if it's presumed to be in, because what I don't have is like the full spreadsheet right here.
Okay,
So,
all right. Apologize for not knowing.
And I will say though that, sorry, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
The service has begun again. The cans are out there, so definitely want to know, but I'm grateful that fight was fought and those composting services are restored, at least in some areas. New cans are going out.
And I think I heard that solid waste person has
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Was there someone on the phone who wanted to?
We'll follow up and get back. Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Alatel. And that's it for the key for now.
Okay. All right, in terms of 2022 utilities and enterprises, they compared to the last fall's budget, came in 1.7 million savings across all of them. They were able to cover $641,000 in increased fuel-related costs as well as for AWW chemical costs. There was a $2 million savings as a result of revising their debt schedules. On the capital side, we are proposing $3 million to the Anchorage sewer utility for a NIPDES permit renewal project.
Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Rask, I know you said we didn't have this earlier, but maybe there's someone, we have a deputy meeting manager that handles utilities. Maybe she can speak to this if she's around. This is great. We've got good savings. It seems like the utilities are doing really well. And yet we have a significant fall in the use of NISA. And so, on the one, are the cost savings driven in part by the fact that we're not taking use of NISA, or are those things unrelated?
Okay. Marilyn was just in my ear that the MISA is based on net book value, as property value based, not operating costs.
Okay, well, we've seen a very significant increase in property values for a lot of the properties in Anchorage. So can we sort of explain that then?
So you want details on the assessed values for utilities and enterprises?
I guess I just want to, we can push it off till later. I just want to know why the use of NISA fell so much.
Okay.
That's all.
Will do.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Costa?
This is just a Wagner, but commercial property values have not seen the same kinds of increases as residential property values. And so I don't have a basis. I'd love to have a briefing on that. We can do that at the committee, but there's some logical probabilities out there.
Thank you, Mr. Constance.
Okay, we're almost done. At least I am. Okay, in terms of the next slide is just the moving parts that you all are very familiar with, but those are a list of the pieces of legislation that have been proposed, of which two of them you've already addressed, the first two, and then the third one is our bank forgiveness for the overspending. So the rest will be before you on April 26th.
Ms. Ella?
Thank you. So which one of these is the budget approved post-veto overrides?
We're not introducing, you're looking for a new.
I know, but you've got, oh, okay, I see. So, but you've got the end of year expenditure like we didn't even start with the 2022 budget in this line. I mean, I don't know, what's AR 2022-98? I mean, that's the revised budget, that's 1Q. So we need the document, I think, that we're starting from in this sequence, because we need to be really clear. So the budget that was approved needs to be listed, I think. Because that's where we start, and then we revise it in 1Q. So if we don't start with the foundational piece, we aren't really having a full conversation about what we're revising. Does that make sense? Because that's where I'm going to go back and look.
Sure, and as a point of reference, yes, we can produce a point of reference for you. But what you're saying is you want to go back and have the Assembly consider another document.
No, I'm saying if the public is trying to follow along with us as to the moving parts, one of the moving parts is the baseline budgets. Because that's where they may look to say, okay, was it here and now is it going to be here? Because I think first quarter, again, is already an interesting thing to go through, but we always have to be really clear where we're starting from. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Alatal. And I will just note that the Assembly Budget Analyst, Desiree Camacho, is on the line. And Ms. Alatal, to your point, I think it would be helpful to post that document, that approved document, to this work session's documents. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. I think that to follow on what Ms. Alatal's saying, whatever compendium location we keep all of these files, we should have the mayor's proposed budget, the Assembly's adopted budget, and the AIM adopted that we accepted at the last meeting that addresses the difference between those two documents, right? If we're creating a record of the history of this process, we passed an AIM that was negotiated between the LOB office, Maryland, with Desiree. That item as well should be in here. So I would say we would add, if we're going to create a file for this, all of those documents. The mayor's proposed, the Assembly's adopted, then that AIM that addresses the difference between the two, and then all these documents going forward so that the public can follow the true and accurate history of the process.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
And if I could clarify, Mr. Constant, were you referring to, because we worked with Desiree about an Excel spreadsheet that had track the whole incremental steps and the numbers, and is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the detail escapes me, but we had it on our agenda just at the last meeting.
Well, that was about the Assembly reorg, and that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, it's the summary changes to AO 2021-96 as amended. It's AIM 37-2022.
Okay, all right, last slide.
Wait, I had a question on that.
I never thought a list of bills.
No, it's not the list of bills. This is a good time to have this conversation.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
So I assume that AR 2022-98, which you're going to introduce, is revised with a baseline from the mayor's budget. And so, for example, we just had an example where he proposes, he says it's an increase, but it's actually a decrease from our approved 2022 budget. So can you produce an S version that we can move that uses the 2022 Assembly budget, not the Assembly budget, the 2022 municipal budget that was passed and overrode vetoes. Use that as the baseline and then show the ups and downs from that baseline. Can that be the AR you introduce on the 26th?
Well, we've already introduced this.
Can you introduce an S version that uses the approved municipal budget as the actual baseline so we can see the actual ups and downs, as opposed to taking this unilateral, I would say illegal budget as the baseline and using that for the ups and downs?
Why don't you introduce an amended version?
Okay, so you're saying OMB is...
No, I'm not saying that we won't do it, but I'd like to talk to municipal attorney about what that symbolizes.
I understand that. I think that would be a very useful tool for everyone to introduce an S version. Who's in this?
Claire and
So, Ms. Christensen, is it possible for the administration to produce an S version that we could use that sets as a baseline the approved 2022 budget?
Is it possible? Can we do the chair at your two microphones?
Yeah, the field can't hear you.
There's one up there.
Party time.
Through the chair, Blair Christensen, Deputy Municipal Attorney. Is it possible? I assume it's in the realm of possibility. I would say we can have discussions internally about the request and probably come up with an answer. Certainly there is some discretion as to what resolutions and ordinances get submitted by the administration.
And so we are certainly willing to have the discussion internally and provide you with an answer.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So I have Mr. Constant and Ms. Zelatel in the queue, but before I move to Mr. Constant, I just want to note for those following along that AO number 2021-96 as amended is the approved 2022 general government operating budget for the municipality of Anchorage. It was amended and approved November 23rd, 2021, and the mayoral veto date, the override for it is December 10, 2021. So again, that's AO 2021-96 as amended. This is the approved Anchorage general 2022 general government operating budget for the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I just want to make sure people tune into the record of what was said here and really think back to what our conversation meant, what I just said to Mr. Moore and the treasurer about how the assembly found itself in a position where it started projecting because we couldn't find projections that felt accurate to us. That, and this is no strike against you, Cheryl, you literally just said, then why don't you submit an S version? And that's exactly what we did in the process before because we felt like we had to. And so, but that's not the best way to operate this city by any means at all. That's not the best way. But we do have the capacity to do that. But then now 6 months later, 5 months later, it's still being ignored, even though it's the law of this municipality. It's the enacted code of this municipality. It is the ordinance of this municipality. And so, yes, I recognize your frustration, and it's shared, and there's got to be a better way.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next is Ms. Zelatel and then Mr. Whittleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the municipal attorney, is it still a municipality, or I guess the administration's position, that fund certification is required, and that our approved budget was not the approved budget of the municipality?
Through the chair, Blair Christensen, Deputy Municipal Attorney. I don't think it's a municipal attorney's position that the budget passed is not the budget of the municipality. It certainly is the past budget. I think we've had many discussions, and OMB would probably be better to answer that, but there was a variety of reasons as to why some of those line items could not be implemented as passed. And so I don't think it's ever been our position that that wasn't the budget passed by the assembly. And I would say the budget is like a bunch of blocks put together. And when there was vetoes and then veto overrides, those blocks changed shapes and sizes and couldn't be put back together in the same way.
Chair, could you tell me what the document reference was again for the Assembly's approved budget? I'm sorry, I missed it. And then I have a follow-up question. AO number 2021-96 as amended. And then AIM 37-2022 is what the Assembly passed at the last meeting for those conforming changes with the budget and the organization. Okay, so may I ask my follow-up question now then? Can you agree that the budget, the controlling budget of the municipality that we should be working from is AO 2021-96 as amended?
Through the chair, with the veto overrides?
Yes.
Correct, that's the budget.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Ms. Zelatel. Mr. Whittleton? And then Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I guess some of this, we had on our agenda last time this 11C, it's the AIM 37-2022, Mr. Constant mentioned. But if you go through it has the past budget, and then it has all the detailed line items in here, and it shows changes due to the amendments for the operating budget. So it seems, so we have this in front of us. So I worked out the assumption we were at starting point with what we were presented Tuesday. but that's not the case. But it's right here, we choose to start us from here. I mean, it almost looks like that was a starting point, because that's all we have.
Yeah, I don't have the documents in front of me.
Okay, 11C from last week.
The AM support to the operating budget,
Beg your pardon?
the AM support to the operating.
Well, I know it said, this is the one that's a summary of changes to AO 2021-96 as amended in the budget. 2022, but it included the whole package for 11C, had the kind of the budget showing each of the amendments of different line items and how it affected things.
It was the rework item.
Thank you.
Yeah, correct me if I'm misunderstanding.
Go ahead.
I don't know that I want to correct you, but what I believe we have been instructed is that the basis of AR 2022-98 isn't the comported changes that were in the AIM with the background in it, but instead is the document as proposed by the mayor in the previous iteration. And so I was thinking, my comment was going to be, Ms. Christensen, that you said you don't think it's ever been policy that the budget passed by the assembly isn't the approved budget, but in fact the basis of this budget is the document that's not the approved budget. And so from a practical perspective, it seems like we have two different conversations that are still happening here, and in some way we're just craving to figure out how to make it one conversation.
Go ahead, Ms. Christensen, and then Mr. Littleton.
Through the chair, I think that's correct. I think the problem is certainly the budget that the Assembly passed is the budget the Assembly passed. The problem is that it couldn't be implemented in the way the Assembly passed it for a variety of reasons. There was portions, and maybe OMB can correct me if I'm wrong, there was some portion that was over the tax cap. There was a variety of different problems with the budget as it was passed. And so when it was loaded, the administration had the problem of not being able to load the funds as it was passed. I don't know if OMB would like to comment on that?
Well, it relates to the revenue projections and the difference in opinion, the revenue being available to support the additional spending. So that's the fundamental.
And I think that the administration was challenged with trying to adhere to all portions of the code and all portions of the law in implementing the budget. And if the CFO says they can't certify the funds, while I understand that there are code provisions about the budget, there's also code provisions about the CFO having to certify the funds. And so the administration felt as though we were between a rock and a hard place, because we can't pick and choose which portions of the code we comply with and which we don't.
Except it's clear that the section it wasn't complied with was the section that said that the Assembly has the fiscal responsibility to establish and amend a budget. And so that's the part that was selectively chosen not to, which again is demonstrated by the basis of the budget that we're facing here, this proposed revised budget. And so again, somebody used the metaphor of the horse, here we are, or a tennis match, here we are. And so yeah, picking and choosing is in fact happening here.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. So we'll go to Mr. Littleton, then Mr. Youngar, then Ms. Quinn-Davidson, and then Ms. Zalaton. We have about 10 minutes left. Mr. Littleton?
Okay, so if I look for amendments, if I start with the document that shows the Assembly amendments, I don't have to make many amendments here anyway, because the ones I made pass to fully fund urban EMS. So I mean, is that going to become our starting point then? The one that's here in 11C?
I mean, that is the question before us, right? I mean, but I think what you're looking at is the document that the Assembly staff and the chair presented. And so I don't know what attachment they gave you that with all the line item details. And so I believe it is the version the Assembly provided, the Assembly approved version of the budget without regard for the subsequent action that was taken.
Any follow-up, Mr. Butterflies?
No, thank you.
Okay. Next is Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try to be real quick. What's really interesting about this process is, so the Assembly adopted the 2022 budget. The administration said, we don't agree with your revenue projections, and they created their own budget, version of the budget. Now, in this process, they're saying, we do agree with your revenue projections, but we're still not going to follow or use the starting point, your budget. And that makes it really challenging on the 26th, and even before that, the amendment process starting on the 22nd. And so, I just say, like, logistically speaking, the next couple of weeks, we're going to have to either create a lot of really detailed amendments, or we could go back to using the approved budget as the baseline, and the mayor could sort of show the few places that he has increased or decreased. I think most of which we agree with. The increased funding for APD, the increased funding for the fire department, those are uncontroversial. The challenge here is that you've not used the approved Assembly budget as the baseline. And it's going to create, again, just a really complicated process over the next 2 weeks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next is Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. My question for Ms. Christensen is, if I don't believe this is true, but if you were unable to follow the approved budget because the funds weren't certified, because you didn't agree, you being the administration didn't agree with the revenue, but now you agree with the revenue projections, why are you still not following the approved municipal budget?
Through the chair, and we can have OMB weigh in, but the administration we had a meeting with some members of the Assembly after the budget was passed, while voted, saying this is what we are implementing. Because there's all these problems, will have no real world consequences, and that this is the budget we will be working on. I think it's traditional that first quarter budget revisions come from the budget that was implemented and we've been working from. Mr. Esther?
Yes, correct. And I think that is outlined in the AIM, the document that the chair submitted to the Assembly describing the discussions that took place at the end of December in terms of the agree to disagree, but this is what we'll implement and go forward with. And for the last 4 months or 3 months, we haven't had that discussion in terms of anything else as a different base. We notified the Assembly of what we were doing, proposing. We went back and forth, in fact, in the words used to describe what was taking place. And we didn't have any discussion with the Budget and Finance Committee over the last several months. I wasn't sensitive to this being a stumbling block as far as moving forward.
Go ahead, Ms. Williams. Thank you. So the question I asked, which I think Blair didn't answer, and Cheryl, you were sort of getting there, but you agree with the revenue projections that were included in our past municipal budget. Why are you not implementing those now? If you agree, I mean, I thought it was bogus even when you said we don't agree with them, and they turned out to be right, which is not a surprise to us, but now you agree with them, and you still won't implement the past budget. Why?
Well, first, the projections are 3 months after you made your decisions. And
for 2022, we're still in 2022.
I know, but you made revenue projections your revenue projections last November.
Yeah, and they're accurate.
Well,
I mean, they are. They're consistent with what you all are saying now.
Respectfully.
That's the crazy thing.
So you just want us to use the room tax and your alcohol tax revenue projections. You want us to disregard all the other updates that we've made?
What I want you to do is use the legally passed, charter-directed Assembly municipal budget, which includes revenues that you all agree on. I mean, this is a little crazy. We're like in an alternate universe. There are revenues we all agree on and a past budget, and you're following something else. I mean, it's just hard to fathom, honestly. And just point out, we've been talking about this since November, December. We've had myriad meetings, Budget and Finance Committee meetings, other meetings, where we could have discussed this. So I think they're like, oh, well, we didn't know that was an issue. This is an issue. It's been an ongoing issue because programs aren't being funded. You know, people who want sexual assault, domestic violence prevention funding aren't getting it because you guys won't implement the past budget. That is crazy.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davis, and we have about 5 minutes left. Next is Ms. Zelatel and then Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm gonna propose a solution to try to get off this hamster wheel, which is, what if I simply submit the approved 2022 budget as the S version and the members amend from there for first quarter budget revisions? Because this is ridiculous, this is overly complicated, and I don't think it's fair to the assembly to have to start from there. And it puts the public in a position of knowing our starting point. That could go in the very next opportunity that we have a meeting, which I believe is Tuesday the 19th, we could lay it on the table. So that is.
I don't think you can lay it on the table because it's a special.
An S version, so it doesn't, so I think we're good that we could lay it on the table because it's an X version.
Oh, okay.
Or on the night of or whatever. But I'm thinking that might provide us clarity and a path forward. And it's consistent with the Assembly's policy and prior action. So I wanted to put it out there while we're in an open meeting because if anyone has any significant objections, that's a good way to let me know or to let Dean or Desiree know.
Next is Mr. Constant and Mr. Dunbar.
I think that on half the budget that's fine, and that's on the expenditure side. The revenue side is more complex because the revenues are different. I think that's the point one of the points that I've heard is revenues will come in different than projected, just parallel to the same degree. And so I think that it's not so much the revenue side that needs to be updated in the substitute version because that might create all manner of other problems. It's the expenditure side that is what's important. And we have to make sure that the funds that are available in that process are in fact available for those purposes because there are some probably have restrictions. Anyhow, it's a little more complex than simply reintroducing the previous budget. Otherwise, that's going to put some clog in the wheel. The revenue side is a challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I agree, and the expenditure side should be what it is, and the revenues we appropriated for those expenditures should still exist for those purposes because that was our legally passed budget.
Right. I think that that's generally true. I just think that like there might be $1 million difference in the bed tax lower. There might be $1 million more in the alcohol tax on the general total pool of money. And so I just want to make sure we're carefully thinking through the balance of those two interests.
Exactly, and that's why we need to start with the past budget because that's the traditional first quarter budget revision process.
Thank you, Ms. Zelatel. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar, and we're just about out of time.
Yeah, I'll say that there is a significant problem with that in my mind, introducing that version. And the reason is because the administration's proposed some increases here that I actually agree with. I really agree with. For police and fire, for example. If you propose the S version that doesn't include those, I am worried about public perception. The Assembly itself is opposing those. What we need is a version that the administration works off of ours, increases and includes the increases they want to see, and then we can adopt it. And I think without much controversy, this doesn't have to be a controversial thing. We actually agree with the administration on the increases they wanted to. And so that's my worry about the S version. The S version will, by implication, look at like you or whoever introduces it doesn't support the police and fire increases or the other increases which we think are valuable. So what would actually help everyone get through this process most easily is if the administration took the 2022 approved budget and then worked off of it and gave us an S version that reflects what the changes they want to see from that. And then the amendments I think will be pretty minor on the 26th. If not, I think Ms. Davidson and I, as the chair of the budget committee, will probably try to create another omnibus amendment, and other group bring other amendments too that we can talk about at the work session a week from today.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And we are at 3:01 p.m. Thank you all for being here today. I do want to note that I'm not sure how the amendment deadline of April 20th will be impacted by a potential S version or how that will work, but amendments should be provided to Ms. Camacho by the 20th. We will meet back here on the 22nd, Friday, same time, same place, 1 to 3 p.m. for a second work session. And then the budget will be before us at the meeting, the regular meeting of April 26th. So again, thank you all for being here today.
And if I could just say one more thing.
Go ahead.
Can I get back to you in the morning regarding next steps? All right, and
Yes.
see what we can work on.
Thank you,
Or
Ms.
work
Rath.
on.
Say Monday?
No, tomorrow. Oh, today.
Today's Friday.
How about hopefully by the-
We don't want you working on Easter.
Tomorrow's Saturday.
I know.
Okay.
Pass-
Soon,
pass
I'll
it.
get back to you soon.
Pass it.
I like that work ethic.
Thank you all. We are adjourned.